What if I told you that the most corrupt country in the world could be found on the Horn of Africa? Imagine a landscape where the pervasive shadow of corruption looms large, affecting every facet of life. From the bustling markets of Mogadishu to the remote villages, the grip of corruption is felt universally, shaping the destiny of its people and their governance. Corruption, as we understand it, is not merely about the illegal transactions that occur in dark alleys or secluded offices. It is an intricate web of practices that undermine the very foundations of societies, distorting everything from law enforcement to public services. Globally, perceptions of corruption paint a grim portrait of distrust and inefficiency, but in Somalia these issues are magnified, presenting a stark example of how deep these problems can run. As we peel back the layers of generalities and dive deeper into specific instances, we begin to understand the scale and complexity of the issue. Now, let's dive into the depths of corruption in Somalia and uncover why it tops global charts. Before we delve deeper, what exactly do we mean by corruption? At its core, corruption refers to the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. This can manifest in many forms, some subtle and others overt, but all detrimental to the fabric of society. Broadly, corruption can be seen in both the public and private sectors, affecting everything from small local businesses to large government institutions. In the public sector, corruption typically involves the misuse of official positions or resources by government employees and officials. This can include bribery, the act of offering, giving, receiving, or soliciting something of value to influence the actions of an official or other person in charge. There's also embezzlement, where officials siphon off funds for their personal use, and nepotism, where they favor relatives or friends for jobs and other advantages without regard to merit. Each of these corrupt practices erodes trust in public institutions. When citizens believe that their leaders, or the systems supposed to protect and manage societal resources, are compromised, it leads to a profound breakdown of trust. This breakdown is not just in these institutions, but can spread to a general mistrust in the very structure of society. Moreover, corruption hampers economic and social development. It diverts public resources away from essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure to the pockets of a few, often leaving the broader population worse off. With this understanding, we can better analyze how corruption manifests in Somalia. How does Somalia compare to the rest of the world when it comes to corruption? Somalia often finds itself at the lower end of global corruption rankings. For instance, Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index has consistently placed Somalia among the countries perceived as most corrupt. This index evaluates the public sector corruption levels as seen by experts and business people. And in recent years, Somalia has scored very low, indicating a high level of perceived corruption. When we look at these rankings, it's crucial to understand the context. Countries like Denmark and New Zealand consistently score at the opposite end of the spectrum, often being perceived as the least corrupt nations. This stark contrast highlights the global disparity in how corruption is managed and perceived. But what does a low score on the Corruption Perceptions Index mean for a country like Somalia? It suggests deep-rooted issues in governance and public trust, which can hamper development and peace efforts. These rankings reveal Somalia's challenging position, but let's explore what this means on the ground. Let's look at some real-life examples to illustrate the scale of corruption in Somalia. Corruption in Somalia is not just a series of isolated incidents, but a systemic problem that affects every level of society. One of the most glaring examples is the misappropriation of public funds. Reports from international watchdogs have pointed out that governmental transparency is nearly non-existent, with funds frequently diverted from their intended purposes. For instance, a significant amount of the national budget, which is supposed to be allocated for public health and education, routinely finds its way into the pockets of high-ranking officials. This diversion of funds exacerbates the challenges in these crucial sectors, leaving the general population underserved. The judicial system in Somalia also presents a grim picture of corruption. The judiciary is riddled with bribery and influence from powerful clans and political figures. There have been numerous accounts where judges were reported to have accepted bribes in exchange for favorable rulings. This corruption at the judicial level undermines the rule of law and erodes public trust in the legal system, making it difficult for the average citizen to expect any form of justice. Illicit business practices are another cornerstone of the corrupt environment in Somalia. The country's strategic location along the Horn of Africa makes it a hotbed for illegal activities, including money laundering and arms trafficking. These operations are often intertwined with legitimate businesses to obscure their illicit origins. A notable case involved a well-known Somali businessman who was implicated in a large-scale smuggling operation. This operation not only violated international law but also fueled local conflicts, further destabilizing the region. Government contracts in Somalia are often awarded in opaque processes that favor those with connections over those with competence. There have been several instances where contracts worth millions of dollars were granted to companies owned by relatives or associates of government officials without a proper bidding process. This not only leads to poor execution of public projects, but also inflates costs dramatically, draining national resources. International aid misuse is perhaps one of the most heartbreaking aspects of corruption in Somalia. Despite the large inflow of aid intended to help the nation recover from decades of conflict and humanitarian crises, a substantial portion of this aid never reaches the intended beneficiaries. Investigations have revealed that aid supplies are frequently sold on the black market or redirected to fund militia groups. This misuse of aid not only deprives the needy but also perpetuates the cycle of violence and instability. These cases shed light on the systemic nature of corruption in Somalia and its impact on everyday life. They illustrate a complex web of corruption that not only drains the country's resources but also hampers its development and the well-being of its citizens. The pervasive corruption in Somalia remains a significant barrier to achieving stability and prosperity, illustrating the urgent need for comprehensive reforms and robust anti-corruption measures. Beyond the headlines, what is the real impact of such widespread corruption? In Somalia, corruption seeps into every facet of life, profoundly affecting the nation and its people. It's not just about misallocated resources or financial irregularities. The true cost is seen in the everyday lives of ordinary citizens. First, consider the public services, crucial to any country's fundamental stability and growth. In Somalia, corruption has severely undermined the quality of healthcare and education. Hospitals and schools struggle with insufficient funding, as money meant to improve these vital institutions often disappears into the pockets of the corrupt. This leads to a dire shortage of medical supplies, underpaid and overworked healthcare professionals, and poorly maintained educational facilities. Economically, the impact is equally devastating. Corruption deters foreign investment, a key driver of economic growth, as investors are wary of unstable and opaque business environments. This lack of investment leads to fewer job opportunities and perpetuates a cycle of poverty and dependency. Moreover, the international community's trust diminishes, affecting Somalia's relations with other nations and limiting opportunities for trade and aid. Thus, the ramifications of corruption extend beyond mere financial loss. It corrodes the very fabric of society, breeding inequality, stifling development, and eroding trust in public institutions. The ripple effects of corruption touch every corner of Somali society. Today, we've journeyed through the murky waters of corruption in Somalia. In our exploration, we started by defining corruption, a complex phenomenon that involves the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. It's a global issue, but its manifestations and impacts can vary dramatically from one country to another. Somalia, unfortunately, stands out in this regard. According to the Global Corruption Index, Somalia has been consistently ranked as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. This isn't just a statistic, it's a reflection of deep-rooted issues within the nation's political, social, and economic systems. We delved into specific case studies that illustrate the pervasive nature of corruption in Somalia. From the misappropriation of public funds to bribery in the judiciary and the manipulation of aid, these examples paint a grim picture of how corruption has infiltrated various layers of society. Such activities not only deplete resources but also erode trust in public institutions, making efficient governance nearly impossible. The impact of this corruption is profound and far-reaching. It stifles economic development, as potential foreign investments are often scared away by the high risks associated with corrupt environments. For the citizens of Somalia, this means higher levels of poverty, inadequate health care, and a lack of educational opportunities. Moreover, corruption undermines efforts to establish lasting peace in a region already torn by decades of conflict. Reflecting on these points, it becomes clear that the stakes are incredibly high. The cycle of corruption and its repercussions not only hinder Somalia's progress but also pose significant challenges to global efforts aimed at promoting stability and development in the region. Understanding these challenges is the first step towards advocating for change and supporting efforts to combat corruption. Thank you for joining me in uncovering these critical issues.